we fixed Chandra's 2012 Ford Focus overheating problem. Chandra came to me with a question. Why is my car overheating? Well, that's a very loaded question. There are many reasons for a car to overheat. Some are in combination with other problems. Sometimes there's only one problem. So I needed to establish the symptoms that were happening when it overheats. Then we can make a plan to fix it. Because of the problem, her cooling system was getting replaced a bit at a time because the overheating was causing damage to different parts. First the heater hoses and connections. Then the coolant reservoir had to be replaced because it cracked wide open. But this gave me more clues to the real problem. So I checked the engine temperature with my scan tool, and at idle, it showed it to be climbing, just sitting still, even though the temperature gauge wasn't moving. I also noticed that the fan wasn't coming on. Aha! So I tried the air conditioner, and while the air conditioner was running, the cooling fan never came on. Well, right there's your problem. This is one source for all of the symptoms that she described. But why was it not working? This was the next test. I decided to go right to the source and bypass everything else to see if the fan even worked. So I created a cable to connect the fan directly to the battery. Good news! It came on! Bad news, I still had 3 other places to look, and 2 of those parts would be very expensive. So I checked the part that would be the cheapest to replace, this is the fan relay, and found it working well. Then we looked at what Chandra could afford. Quite frankly, not much. The simple solution was a new cooling fan controller. This would let us use her working fan and bypass the computer and all the other stuff to make the fan work when it needed to. Well, this fixed the problem, and it cost less than $40 in parts. This is how we made this repair. Our friend Douglas helped me on this project so he could learn, and because I hurt my back and it was very painful to bend over for any length of time. The first thing the instructions say is to mount the sensing probe into the radiator fins. It would require access to both sides of the radiator. Not an easy thing because the air conditioning condenser is mounted to the front of the radiator and the fan shroud is mounted to the back. But with some effort, we did this without having to remove the radiator from the car. Now I decided, based on the instructions, that the best place to mount the probe would be in the upper corner of the radiator on the inlet side. This is the side of the radiator closest to the battery and fuse and relay box. The wire from the probe to the controller cannot be cut, so picking the right spot to mount both the probe and the controller is important. To access this corner of the radiator, though, involved removing both headlights, partially removing the bumper cover and the fan shroud, and putting the car up on ramps to access the bottom. The bumper cover wasn't too hard to remove because the cover under the car had already been removed by things in the road that kind of tore things off. So after removing the headlights, the remaining bolts and retainer rivets needed to be removed from the top of the cover and the fender on the driver's side. The snap-in points on both sides released the cover from the body and it just moved out of the way. With the bumper cover moved out of the way, the next thing was to move the fan shroud so we could access it and the radiator. This is held in place by 2 large clips built into the shroud. Using a screwdriver, I pushed in and up on this and the shroud just slides up. I move it away from the radiator, but really there is no need to remove it from the car because everything can be accessed at this point. To access the front of the radiator, the air conditioning condenser is in the way, but lift on this snap retainer and it will move just enough to be able to work with the radiator in this top corner. The kit comes with a special retainer to hold the probe in place in the radiator. Use the plastic stick on this retainer to move the fins away from the mounting location. You have to move it in 2 locations, one for the retainer itself and one for the probe, to move the fins without damaging the coolant tubes of the radiator itself. The probe only has to have its end in contact with the fins. This means that the probe will be sticking out of the radiator on the fan side. To accommodate the extra length, I drilled a hole in the fan shroud, then enlarged it so the probe could hang out the back. Then we put the fan shroud back in place with the probe poking through. With the probe in place, we next had to find a place to mount the controller. Now there is some space next to the fuse and relay block that is just close enough to the probe location for the connecting wire to reach. This is also close to the battery for good connections. With the controller mounted, we then snapped the air conditioning condenser back, then put the bumper cover back on so it wouldn't get damaged during the rest of the install. Now we gave the wiring our attention. The instructions show there are several ways to hook up the power and other connections. This is how we did it. The red wire has a fuse in it, so it went directly to the positive connection on the battery. The ground connection for the fan I connected to the jump start lug to the negative battery connection. The ground wire for the relay I connected to the fastener mounting the controller to the structural support. The yellow ignition switch lead can be connected to a switched connection or to a constant power connection, depending on if you want to have the fan shut off with the ignition or stay on until the radiator has cooled down. I connected it to the red battery wire behind the fuse for a very simple connection. This way, the fan will stay on until the radiator cools down. The orange wire is the fan positive connection. It isn't long enough to reach the fan, so I added some 12 gauge wire to it to reach the fan. I used the existing fan plug to connect the positive and negative fan wires. This way I could test to make sure that the fan was turning in the right direction and correct it if it did not. Don't want the fan going in the wrong direction, then it's trying to push air through the radiator, and when you're driving down the road, that doesn't work. This controller also has an air conditioning fan on connection. This is the green wire. I had to add wire to it to reach the power connection for the air conditioning compressor. When the air conditioning compressor is turned on, this activates the fan to draw air through the condenser and radiator. The easiest place to make this connection on this car is on top of the timing cover on the top of the motor. Here, 5 wires go down to the bottom of the motor inside of a wire harness. 2 go to the air conditioning compressor. I had to probe each of them to find the correct one. On this car, the brown wire with the white stripe is the correct wire for the connection. The instructions say the blue wire would be used for a second fan. I wouldn't necessarily do that unless I put a relay for the second fan's power and use the blue wire just to activate the relay. This controller has 25 amp fuses in the red wire for its power and a 25 amp fuse going to the fan. Now, just to give a perspective here, just one of these fans can draw as much as 25 amps. Some can draw even more depending on size. I just tied the blue wire out of the way because there's only one fan anyway. Then we zip tied the wires out of the way and away from heat. We put the headlights back in and then tested everything. Chandra says it's working much better now. The air conditioner is cooling the car much better and it's not overheating. So this is how we diagnosed and repaired Chandra's overheating problem. But what do you think? Is this something that can help your overheating or air conditioning issues? Let us know in the comments below. If you found this video helpful, share it with your friends. They might appreciate it.
Thanks for watching our video. If you like what you see, press the like button below and subscribe. And also check out our other videos.